It was a hot afternoon in Lagos, and Mama Sade's bukka was full. The smell of fresh stew filled the air, and hungry customers rushed to get their share. Men in dusty overalls, women with baskets, drivers from the motor park, all sat down quickly, eager to eat. Her food was the talk of the street, sweet and irresistible. But that day, something strange happened. Kunle, a young mechanic, scooped a large piece of meat with his spoon. He smiled, ready to bite, when suddenly his face changed. He froze, staring at what he held. His hand shook. His eyes widened as the meat in his bowl shifted before everyone's eyes. What looked like juicy beef had become something else. A bloody finger, still fresh, still human, was in his spoon. Kunle dropped the bowl, screaming. The sound of his voice tore through the bukka like thunder. Customers stood in shock. One woman fainted. Another spat out her food, only to see a human ear lying on her plate. Chaos broke loose. People shouted, bowls flew, and the once joyful place became a house of horror. And in that moment, everyone knew. The secret behind Mama Sade's food was finally out. Long before the chaos inside Mama Sade's bukka, her life was filled with pain and hunger. Sade Adeyemi, known by many as Mama Sade, was just another woman selling roasted corn by the roadside in Lagos. With the little firewood she gathered and the tray on her head, she struggled each day to feed her family. The smoke from her fire often burned her eyes, but she endured it because her children depended on her. Her husband, Jamiu, was a tall man with gentle eyes. He had been out of work for many months, moving from one company to another, begging for a job that never came. One morning, he left the house with hope in his heart, promising Sade and the children that things would get better. But fate had a cruel plan. That very afternoon, as he crossed the busy expressway, a trailer lost control and struck him down. The accident crushed his legs beyond repair. When Sade received the news, her world shattered. Doctors fought to save him, but in the end, both legs were amputated. Jamiu could no longer work, and the hospital bills piled like a mountain. Each day, Sade looked at the papers from the hospital with tears in her eyes, wondering how a woman selling roasted corn could ever pay. Her children too felt the pain. Tunde, her eldest at 17, tried to help her sell, but the money they made could not buy even one proper meal. Bola, only 11, often asked for food that was not there. And little Morayo, just 5 years old, cried at night, her stomach empty. The sound of her daughter's hunger pierced Sade's heart like a knife. Neighbors shook their heads in pity. Some gave her small handouts, but it was never enough. Each evening, Sade sat by her smoky fire, thinking of the man she once knew, strong, proud, able to provide. Now Jamiu lay weak in the hospital, his spirit broken, and she, left alone, carried the heavy burden of survival. It was in this moment of despair, when her hope was gone and her strength was failing, that temptation would soon find her. A childhood friend would appear with promises of wealth, and Sade would face a choice that would change her life forever. One evening, as the sun melted into the Lagos lagoon, Sade walked slowly with heavy thoughts pressing on her mind. Her children were hungry again, and the little corn she sold that day could barely buy gari. She stopped by the water to rest, her eyes red from tears. There, she saw a face she had not seen in many years, her childhood friend, Dupe. Dupe had once been poorer than Sade. In their youth, she had begged for leftover food from neighbors, her clothes always torn. But now Dupe looked transformed. She wore fine lace, her neck shone with gold, and her hands carried a designer bag. Sade was shocked. Could this be the same Dupe she once pitied? With a wide smile, Dupe hugged her. "Sade, my sister, it has been long, you look troubled. Tell me what weighs on your heart." Tears fell as Sade poured out her story. Her husband Jamiu in the hospital, the accident, the amputations, the children starving, the debts she could not pay. Dupe listened quietly, nodding, her eyes glittering with something Sade could not understand. Finally, Dupe leaned closer and whispered, "Do you think I got all this wealth by chance? No, my sister. There is a way, a powerful way. If you are ready, I will show you." Sade frowned. "What way?" she asked. Dupe smiled mysteriously. "Meet me here tonight when the world sleeps. Then you will see." That night, when her children had fallen asleep on empty stomachs, Sade left her small room and returned to the lagoon. The place was silent, the moon glowing faintly on the water. Dupe was waiting, dressed in white, her eyes sharp in the moonlight. "Come," she said. Tonight you will meet the one who changes destinies." Suddenly, a wind began to blow, cold and strong. The trees bent, the waves of the lagoon roared. Sade gasped, clutching Dupe's arm. "What is happening?" But before she could finish, the wind lifted them like feathers. The ground disappeared, and she felt herself sinking, deeper and deeper, until they stood inside a glowing palace beneath the water. The palace sparkled with strange lights. The walls were covered with shining shells, and the floor was as smooth as glass. On a golden throne sat a figure, half hidden in a storm of wind and mist. This was Olokun, the river goddess. Her voice rumbled like thunder. "Sade Adeyemi, I know your pain, I know your hunger. I can give you wealth, food, and power, but you must give me loyalty and sacrifice. Nothing comes free." Sade trembled, but Dupe nodded quickly. "Say yes," Dupe urged. "Say yes, and your life will change." As Sade stood there, her heart beating like a drum, she thought of her starving children, her helpless husband, and the mountain of debt. Her lips parted, and with a shaky voice she whispered, "Yes." The goddess smiled. She clapped her hands, and 3 beautiful women appeared, Adesuwa, Ronki, and Bisi, dressed like queens. By day, they would watch Sade's new bukka. By night, they would enforce the covenant. Olokun then placed a sack at Sade's feet. When she opened it, she saw meat that looked fresh and inviting. "Cook this," the goddess said, "and men will never resist your food." That night, when the wind carried her back to the shore, Sade held the sack tightly. She knew her life had changed forever. The very next morning, Mama Sade began her new life. She set up a small bukka in Mushin, close to the bus park. At first, the people thought it was just another food seller trying her luck. But when they tasted her stew, everything changed. The meat was soft, the soup rich, and the flavor unforgettable. Word spread quickly. Within days, her shop was full from morning till night. Drivers, mechanics, traders, and even office workers left other places to eat only at Mama Sade's bukka. Kunle the mechanic was always there, licking his fingers. Iarisi, who sold tomatoes in the market, praised her loudly. Okan, the bus driver, told his passengers, "If you have not eaten Mama Sade's food, you don't know real taste." Her customers grew like ants to sugar, and money flowed into her hands. With her new wealth, Mama Sade brought her husband Jamiu home from the hospital. She paid all the debts and even bought fine clothes for her children. For the first time in years, she smiled with pride. But deep inside, she remembered the words of the goddess. Nothing comes free. Not long after, strange things began to happen. Her second child, Bola, fell sick. His body grew weak, and the doctors could not explain it. To outsiders, it looked like ordinary sickness, but Mama Sade knew better. That night, as she lay awake, a cold wind brushed her face. In her ears, she heard the voice of Olokun whisper, "Fill the pot." Fear gripped her heart. She understood what the goddess wanted. Bola's life was the price for her thriving bukka. Her hands shook as she covered him with a blanket, tears burning her eyes. How could she give up her son? But how could she refuse, knowing the oath she had taken? The next morning, Bola's condition grew worse. Neighbors pitied her, saying sickness had chosen her family again. But Mama Sade knew the truth. Her business was growing, her food was famous, but her heart carried a heavy secret. The goddess had given her wealth, but now the goddess was asking for blood. The sickness that held young Bola grew stronger each day. His once lively voice faded to a whisper, and his legs could no longer carry him. Mama Sade ran from one hospital to another, but nothing worked. Deep inside, she knew the truth. This was not an ordinary illness. It was the demand of the river goddess. One night, as she sat beside Bola's bed, a strong wind blew into the room. The lamp shook, the curtains lifted, and Mama Sade heard the familiar voice of Olokun. "Do not delay," the goddess whispered. "Your pot must be filled." Sade closed her eyes, tears running down her face. She wanted to resist, but fear tied her hands. By morning, Bola's breathing stopped. Her son was gone. The whole street mourned with her. Neighbors carried her in their arms and said, "Mama Sade, be strong, God will comfort you." They wept with her, but only she knew the dark secret. That same week, her bukka became even more popular. More customers came, more money filled her pocket. Success rose on the ashes of her son. Not long after, her youngest child, Morayo, began to cough. At first, Sade told herself it was only catarrh, but soon the little girl grew weaker, refusing food, her small frame wasting away. Sade's heart broke. She tried everything to save her daughter, but the goddess had already marked her. Within weeks, Murayo too was gone. By this time, Sade had buried 2 of her children. The neighbors whispered, "Why is death visiting this family again and again?" Some said she was cursed, others pitied her. But her bukka kept flourishing. People ate and praised her food, never knowing the hidden price behind its sweetness. Then sorrow struck again. Jamiu, her husband, who had survived the accident, also began to waste away. His eyes grew dim, his voice faint. He wept often, blaming himself for bringing so much suffering to the family. One evening, he closed his eyes and never woke again. Sade buried him beside her 2 children, her heart heavy with guilt. Now only her eldest son, Tunde, remained. He watched silently as death carried his siblings and father. The 3 strange women, Adesiwa, Ronki, and Bisi, still came daily to eat at the bukka, their red eyes flashing like warning lamps. Deep down, Sade knew what would happen next. The goddess would not rest. By now, Mama Sade's bukka had become the pride of the whole street. From morning till night, people trooped in to buy her food. Drivers parked their buses just to get a plate. Traders from the market came in groups, laughing as they ate. Even workers from offices nearby found their way to her small shop. To everyone, Mama Sade was blessed. But in her heart, she carried the weight of sorrow. 3 lives, her husband, her son Bola, and her little Murayo, were gone. Only Tunde remained, and he too looked like a shadow waiting for his turn. It was on one of those busy afternoons that a young evangelist named Daniel Ogunleye walked into the bukka. He was only 26, a fiery preacher who moved from street to street, telling people about God's power. That day, he was tired and hungry, so he decided to sit down and buy food. Mama Sade greeted him warmly, placing a steaming plate of rice and meat before him. Daniel smiled, lifted his spoon, and prayed softly. But just as he was about to take his first bite, something strange happened. A bird flew in through the open window and knocked the meat out of his spoon. Daniel was surprised, but thought little of it. He picked another piece, but again the bird swooped down, striking the spoon from his hand. People laughed and shouted, "This bird must be mad." Mama Sade forced a smile, though her eyes twitched with fear. When Daniel tried a 3rd time, the bird returned once more and knocked the food away. The whole bukka roared with laughter, but Daniel's spirit grew troubled. He left the shop quietly, but that night he prayed. As he knelt on the floor of his small room, a vision came to him. He saw Mama Sade's bukka filled with people, but instead of eating beef, they were eating human flesh. He saw blood in their plates and shadows of 3 beautiful women with eyes glowing red. Daniel trembled. He knew this was not just a dream, it was a revelation. The next day he returned to the street and stood outside the bukka, shouting with all his strength, "People of Lagos, hear me. This food is cursed. This food is not what it seems. Do not eat here, for the hand of darkness is in this place." But the customers only laughed at him. Some called him mad, others mocked him. "Evangelist, leave this woman alone," they said. "Her food is sweet, and God has blessed her." Mama Sade herself came out, her face full of anger. "Look at this hungry preacher," she shouted. "He is jealous of my success. Why should anyone believe him?" The crowd cheered her on, and some young men even beat Daniel, pushing him away from the shop. Bruised and limping, he walked off slowly, his Bible clutched to his chest. But as he left, he raised his voice and declared, "Laugh at me if you want, but mark my words. The truth will not hide forever. I will return, and when I return, the light of God will expose what is hidden in this place." His words hung in the air like a warning no one wanted to hear. After burying her husband and 2 children, Mama Sade's heart was like a dry well, empty and broken. Only her eldest son Tunde remained. He was 17, tall and strong, with the quiet eyes of his late father. He rarely spoke, but his silence was heavy. He had seen too much, his siblings dying one by one, his father taken too soon. Every night, he watched his mother, sensing there was more to their pain than ordinary misfortune. Then, as if fate had marked him, Tunde fell ill. It began with a fever, then weakness, then a strange cough that no doctor could explain. Mama Sade ran from hospital to hospital, but nothing worked. The neighbors shook their heads and whispered, "This family is cursed." But Mama Sade knew better. At night, when she tried to sleep, she felt the cold wind enter her room. She heard Olokun's voice, sharp and commanding, "The pot is not full. Your son must come to me." Her hands trembled. She had given her husband. She had given her children. Was she now to give her last son her only comfort in this dark world? She sat by Tunde's bedside, holding his frail hand, tears pouring from her eyes. He looked at her with weak eyes and whispered, "Mama, don't cry. God will help us." His words cut her like a knife. He still believed in God, while she was drowning in a covenant of blood. Days passed, and Tunde grew weaker. The three strange women, Adesewa, Ronki, and Bisi, kept visiting the bukka, their elegant clothes shining in the sun, but their eyes flashing red whenever they glanced at him. They were no ordinary customers, they were messengers of the goddess, watching, waiting, reminding Mama Sade of her oath. One evening, as the wind howled outside, they appeared in her dream, standing by Tunde's bed. "If you delay," they warned, "a terror greater than death will fall upon you." Mama Sade woke with a scream, sweat soaking her body. She looked at her son sleeping, his breath shallow, his face pale. Her heart was torn between love and fear. Could she defy the goddess now? Could she risk her own life, knowing what she had already seen? In that moment, she realized she was trapped. The goddess had her life in chains, and unless a miracle came, Tunde would be the next to die. The day came when Mama Sade's bukka was fuller than ever. The smell of her stew drifted through the street, pulling customers like ants to sugar. About 50 people sat inside, bending over steaming plates of rice, amala, and thick meat stew. The sound of spoons hitting plates, voices laughing, and chairs scraping filled the air. To all, it was an ordinary day, but in heaven, something was about to be revealed. Evangelist Daniel Ogunle had been praying through the night. His spirit was restless, and his heart was heavy with a warning from God. That afternoon, as he passed by Mama Sade's bukka, a strange heaviness pressed on him. He stopped, staring at the crowded shop, and then the spirit whispered, "Enter and speak." With steady steps, he walked in, clutching his Bible tightly. As he entered, Mama Sade froze. Her spoon dropped slightly from her hand. She remembered the last time he came, the warnings he gave, the way she stirred a mob against him. Fear rippled through her heart, but she forced. Daniel stood at the center of the bukka and raised his voice. "People of Lagos, listen to me. This food is not ordinary. What you eat here is a covenant with death. But the Lord says today, the truth will be revealed." Some customers laughed, others hissed at him. But before anyone could drag him out, Daniel lifted his voice in prayer. "Father, expose what is hidden in darkness. Let your light shine here." The moment he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. A cold wind rushed through the bukka, shaking the wooden tables. Then suddenly, screams pierced the air. A young man named Kunle looked down at his plate and dropped his spoon with a shout. This is a human finger," he cried. Another woman spat out her meat, only to find she had been chewing a human ear. One by one, plates began to change. The beef turned into rotten flesh, the stew into thick, dripping blood. The smell of decay filled the room. Chaos erupted. Bowls fell, food splattered, and people ran outside, gagging and vomiting. Mothers screamed, men shouted, and the once joyful bukka turned into a house of horror. Mama Sade's face grew pale. She tried to run, but the ground seemed to hold her feet. Her hands shook as her secret, long hidden, was exposed before everyone's eyes. Then, from the shadows, 3 women appeared, Adesewa, Ronki, and Bisi. They were no longer ordinary maidens, but spirits with glowing red eyes and voices like thunder. They began to chant incantations, their words filling the air with dread. Some customers fainted where they stood, others fell to their knees, crying out in terror. Mama Sade, realizing the end of her lies had come, darted toward the door. But the evangelist's prayers grew louder, clashing with the chants of the spirits. In that moment, the battle between darkness and light had begun. The crowd that fled from Mama Sade's bukka soon gathered again, their fear turning into anger. Shouting and cursing, they chased her through the street until she ran to her house. "Bring her out," voices roared. Stones were thrown, doors were kicked, and a mob pressed hard against her gate. When they forced their way inside, they were shocked. In one room, lying weak and almost lifeless, was her only son, Tunde. His body looked drained, as if death had already claimed him. Women screamed, men shouted, but Evangelist Daniel pushed his way forward and knelt beside the boy. "Lord, let your mercy speak," he prayed, placing his hand on Tunde's chest. At that moment, a violent wind stormed into the house, Windows burst open, curtains flew, and the mob staggered back. The force was not ordinary, it was Olokun herself, the river goddess. Her voice shook the walls. "You dare to challenge me?" she thundered. Her 3 agents, Adasiwa, Ronki, and Bisi, stood beside her, their red eyes burning. The mob screamed and scattered, some leaping out through windows in terror. The goddess's wind threw men against walls, chairs and tables flying like leaves in a storm. Mama Sade hid in a corner, trembling, her face pale with dread. But Evangelist Daniel did not move. His Bible clutched in one hand, his voice rose above the storm. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" he shouted. He prayed with fire, each word striking like thunder against the wind. The goddess roared, sending wave after wave of power, but Daniel's voice only grew stronger. The more he prayed, the weaker her storm became. The agents tried to chant louder, but their voices cracked, their red eyes dimming. The room shook, not from her power, but from the clash of heaven against darkness. Finally, with one last cry, Daniel declared, "In the name of Jesus, every knee must bow." A great silence followed, and then a crash. The goddess fell to the floor, her true form exposed, helpless, defeated. The agents vanished like smoke in the wind. The mob, stunned but relieved, rushed back in. For the first time in years, Mama Sade's hidden master had been broken. The people looked at Daniel, the young preacher who had dared to stand, and they knew light had conquered darkness. The night after the battle, Mama Sade was taken away in handcuffs. Her face was pale, her head bowed, her clothes torn from the mob's rage. The once celebrated bukka woman was now a prisoner. The crowd followed as police dragged her through the street, their voices filled with anger and sorrow. Some shouted, "Wicked woman." Others wept openly, regretting every plate of food they had eaten in her shop. At the station, journalists gathered quickly. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed into her face. Under the bright light, Mama Sade broke down completely. With trembling lips, she confessed. She told them everything. The accident that left her husband helpless, the hunger of her children, the visit to her friend Dupe, the midnight journey under the lagoon, the river goddess Olokun, the recipes made from human flesh. She spoke of the 3 agents, the sacrifices, the sicknesses that were no sickness at all. Her words poured like water, each confession shocking the world. People who once praised her stew now spat on the ground in disgust. The news spread like wildfire across Nigeria. Television stations carried the story, newspapers printed her face, and social media buzzed with anger and fear. The name Mama Sade became a warning, a curse, a story parents whispered to children at night. In court, the evidence was clear. Mama Sade had given herself over to darkness. Though she claimed she was trapped, though she wept bitterly, the law gave its judgment. She was sentenced to death. The courtroom fell silent when the verdict was read. Some said it was too little for the lives lost. Others shook their heads, saying her soul had already been destroyed long before the sentence came. But in the midst of sorrow, a miracle happened. Back at her house, Evangelist Daniel continued to pray for her son Tunde. The boy who had been lying lifeless suddenly coughed. His eyes opened, bright and clear. He sat up, his body whole, his strength restored. The crowd gasped, some fell to their knees, others shouted praises to God. The boy who was meant to be the final sacrifice was alive again. Daniel lifted Tunde in his arms and took him to church for deliverance. The government later took custody of him, promising to care for his education and future. To many, he became a living testimony that light can still shine even in the darkest of nights. As for Mama Sade, her last days were spent in prison, where she wept and prayed. Some said she repented before her death, others doubted her tears. But her story remained a bitter lesson to all who heard it. The moral of this tale is simple but sharp. Desperation can lead to dangerous choices. Not every success is clean, not every food is innocent, and not every smile hides truth. Evil will always demand more, and what is hidden in darkness will one day be exposed in the light. So my friend, this is the story of Mama Sade, the woman who sold sorrow in plates of stew. Her hunger for wealth led her into darkness, but in the end, every secret was revealed. This folk tale is a reminder that shortcuts come with hidden costs, and that no matter how long evil hides, the truth will always come to light. If this story touched your heart, do not let it end here. There are many more stories waiting to teach, to warn, and to remind us of the wisdom our ancestors left behind. Subscribe now to African Folktales by Lawrence James, and join us as we bring you more tales that will make you think, reflect, and never forget. Because in every story, there is a lesson, and in every lesson, there is a light.